Hello and welcome to the Intellect's Cove. I'm Colin Fairley. I'm a pragmatist philosopher and political theorist based at Queen's University in Canada. And in this online lecture, I am going to finish the third video on Chapter 8, The War on Cancer, of my new book, Aging and the Ethics of Longevity Science, available to download for free as an open access book from Oxford University Press. Right, so in this third and final video of Chapter 8, I'm going to anticipate and address some of the geroconservative objections, those who will insist that the war against disease will be sufficient and that we don't need to target the rate of aging, which I've been arguing throughout the book. So just a reminder on what I refer to as geroconservatism. This is a position that maintains, broadly speaking, that with respect to the aspiration to harness experimental science to develop pharmacological interventions in aging, we should instead prefer the familiar to the unknown, the tried to the untried, fact to mystery, the actual to the possible, the near to the distant, the sufficient to the abundant with respect to human health and medical science. So this is a medical science articulation of what Michael Oakeshott describes as the disposition of conservatism. All right, so this is the attitude of somebody who says, stop distracting our minds with talking about developing drugs to target aging, because there's lots of things that we can already do, such as exercise and eat better and improve our environment. And, we don't need to talk about pharmacological interventions in aging. Okay, so I'm going to address a couple of more specific iterations of the geroconservative objection, following on from my comments about the war on cancer. Okay, so geroconservatism sentiment 1 gives a more specific articulation to geroconservatism, and this is certainly an attitude that I commonly encounter in teaching and in my research and publications. So it's somebody who articulates something like this: developing drugs to modulate human aging is unnatural, whereas aspiring to eradicate disease is both natural and the appropriate moral aspiration of medical science. This sentiment often mistakenly maintains that the rate of biological aging is programmed, which means it is nature's way of making sure the older generation passes away in time to make room for newer generations. Thus, this stance maintains that longevity science should focus on increasing survival time, namely saving lives, by the prevention, early detection, and treatment of specific diseases. So this is certainly an attitude I encounter in the seminar when I teach my undergraduate students. They're worried about getting jobs and owning a home one day. And so when we talk about science that may increase the duration of life for their parents and grandparents, they will often say, well, what about us getting jobs? What about us owning home? And then when this is articulated as a kind of overpopulation crisis narrative, which, for 2 decades, this was the common attitude I would encounter, less so now with declining fertility rates. But, the argument would be that the reason we age is so that, the world's population doesn't get too high. And so it's got to be programmed. And it's just part of our evolutionary history that there is a finite lifespan, and then that makes room for the new generation, and it can have access to resources. So this is the conjecture that aging is programmed. It's a very common belief, but it's one that is not backed up by science, and so I put it in the category of folk biology. And I'll just talk a little bit about the history of that idea. August Weismann actually articulated this position back in 1889 in Essays upon Heredity and Kindred Biological Problems. He argued, to put it briefly, I consider that duration of life is really dependent upon adaptation to external conditions, that its length, whether longer or shorter, is governed by the needs of the species, and that it is determined by precisely the same mechanical processes of regulation as that by which the structure and functions of an organism are adapted to its environment. So this is the view that aging is an adaptation, that it has a group level benefit. And so as the older cohort ages and dies, this confers a benefit on the reproductive success of the new generation. And you can still find people that articulate this view. I just pointed this piece from Current Aging Science, that aging and death are adaptive programs. But this has been refuted by the science of biological aging in the 20th century. Aging and death are not adaptive programs. What biogerontology reveals is that growth and development are programmed, right? So evolution by natural selection prioritizes reproduction and the caring of the young generation. But aging really is a byproduct of evolutionary neglect, right? So as the force of evolution by natural selection declines in that age, in that part of the lifespan where we're unlikely to be alive in our historical circumstances, and for humans, that would be past the 7th decade of life. So a much more accurate description of aging is to see it as the shadow of the program for developmental growth. It's not that aging is programmed, but reproduction and being healthy during the period of time where the goal of reproduction can be achieved is programmed. So we are programmed to develop into sexually mature adults and then to reproduce. And this is being conducive to the reproductive success of the species, but we're not programmed to develop cancer and Alzheimer's disease in late life. Those diseases, our susceptibility to those diseases is a byproduct of evolutionary neglect rather than something selected for as an adaptation, as having some adaptive benefit to the species as a whole. So Kirkwood and Melov explain why the program theory of aging is flawed. This is a piece in Current Biology. If aging truly served as a general mechanism for population control, there should be ample opportunity to see this mechanism in action, i.e., senescence would be an obvious and widespread killer. The fact that senescence-associated increases in age-related mortality are far from ubiquitous, and that even when they are observed, they contribute to only a relatively small fraction of deaths within the population seriously undermines the argument. Right, so historically, of course, most humans did not survive as they do now past the 7th decade of life. There were some exceptional individuals that did that, but most would have died from an earlier life, and even those that made it through midlife would be susceptible to infectious disease mortality or unhygienic living conditions, etc. We only see the onset of the more prevalent age-related conditions when populations are protected, as our domestic pets are. So, you'll see your dogs and cats age and develop these conditions because they are in an environment where they are protected from predation and starvation. And the same is true for human populations. Now, there's another articulation of geroconservatism, which I have as sentiment number 2. The aspiration to develop safe and effective drugs to modulate aging represents the unknown versus the known ways of increasing health span. Right? So this is somebody who's actually in favor of rate control, but only the non-pharmacological articulation of that ideal. The latter include exercise, safe environments, equitable access to the social determinants of health. Says position maintains that the geroscience hypothesis, when invoked to justify drug innovations in aging, risks distracting our attention away from existing forms of preventative medicine, interventions that can be used, that can be pursued in the here and now to improve healthy life expectancy of the disadvantaged. So this is probably the most common opposition to translational gerontology from within medical science. I think this sentiment is the most prevalent one raised against translational gerontology by preventative medicine. And it's it's because so much is being committed to lifestyle modification, it's very difficult to relax that assumption that that is the sole. It's certainly a powerful predictor of health span and the onset of disease and mortality, but it is not the only way in which we may be able to increase health span. So I want to do a deeper dive into this article I have cited in Circulation to look at the impact of healthy lifestyle factors on life expectancies in the US population. All right, so this is actually a fascinating study. It looked at 5 low-risk lifestyle factors and gives us a sense of the magnitude of benefits from a healthy lifestyle compared to those who comply with none of them. All right, so that's important to keep in mind. The numbers I'm going to show you are between those who live, the adult lifespan in ideal kind of lifestyle circumstances and those who live their whole lifespan in the non-ideal. So there's 5 things. So if you've never smoked, you're never been overweight, you exercise regularly, I think it's like 30 minutes a day on average, you score high on eating a healthy, balanced diet, and you never overindulge with alcohol, among individuals who do these 5 things consistently throughout the adult lifespan, they did a 34-year follow-up. So this looked at them over multiple decades to see if they were compliant with this. And they found that by age 50, women had a 14-year survival benefit and men a 12.2-year benefit compared to those who adopted none of these measures. Right, so what we're comparing for this study is only those with this kind of ideal lifestyle choices and those that didn't do any of them. Now, that certainly suggests that there's a very powerful effect of lifestyle. So, one should try to adopt as best they can all 5 of these lifestyle measures. I'm certainly in favor of promoting and advocating for these non-pharmacological interventions. Right? But having said that, I want to also point out that for large portions of the population, they will find it extremely difficult and to comply with these, because you have to comply with them like for decades. It's not like you just went a week where you did these 5 things, right? You have to go through these things through your 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. And so that is the constraint on the ideal of ideal lifestyle. It's certainly an ideal that's morally laudable, but in terms of feasibility, I think there's going to be cultural variation, which I'll point out in a moment, but there's also going to be some Herculean obstacles. Now, what's, I think, a more prudent approach, remember, I'm a pragmatist philosopher, so let's look at most people. And when I look at those 5 factors, so when I think of myself, I'm on a spectrum. Let's take drinking, for example. When I was in my 20s, a university student before becoming a parent, I drank more beer than I do now, all right, in my mid-50s. I never smoked. I've always exercised. My diet, I'd say, is decent, but again, it also changed. When I was kind of balancing work with a young family, maybe we cook food that would be a little bit different than I do today. So I think the reality is that people are in the middle of the spectrum. It's not stagnant. And there are things that vary it. So one's education level, your wealth. So when how much time you have. So say in retirement, you may have more time to devote to preparing your own meals than you do when you have young children, you're working, a couple of part-time jobs. So I think the spectrum, we should adopt a spectrum approach to the ideal lifestyle, and those five things, which can be powerful, and not only in reducing death, they would be promoting the health span. We want to champion them, but we don't want to say that's the only thing that translational gerontology can offer us. Recall that for Nicholas Maxwell, wisdom inquiry science requires us to address what he calls the problems of living. And one of the problems of living that I want to emphasize is that it's difficult for many people. It may not be for you, may not be for me, but for many people, there is a low compliance with these 5 ideal lifestyle things, especially the exercise one. The exercise one, you have to have time. Again, I'm a big advocate of exercise, but I have a flexible work schedule. As an academic, grew up in a household with a father who was an Olympic athlete. We were always enrolled in sports and activities. I've always weight trained, my whole adult life. But that's my story. That's for many other people, that's not their story. And so ideal lifestyle has to be complied for decades. And I think a pragmatic articulation of medical ideals will take the reality that most people don't comply with all 5 things for their whole adult lifespan. That's not to say that we shouldn't advocate for trying to better achieve that. There definitely can be. When we look at Canada, the United States, we come up well short of what a reasonable expectation of like dietary and physical exercise should look like. But we also, I think, should have humility to recognize that most people have lots of things that they're trying to juggle, and optimal health is not the only thing that they care about. And that will be the focus of the next chapter that we look at, the good life as a constraint on longevity science. But I emphasize this issue because this then opens the door to why the development of pharmacological interventions in aging are going to be both necessary and morally desirable, because not everyone is going to be able to comply with those 5 ideal lifestyle factors. And I think geroprotective drugs may offer a bigger benefit than what compliance with these lifestyle modifications are likely to yield. So it's, I think, a challenge for the steamship of modern public health is balancing, how far you can actually, in the tale of the journey through the ocean of longevity, I described the passengers as, being told to hold on to the railing of the ship as the waves hit. And, some people do. Some people don't, but even those that hold on tightly as they age, they too will be washed overboard by chronic diseases. Just to agree with the critic, the geroconservative critic, who argues that lifestyle modifications can be very powerful and that we shouldn't just accept the status quo as a given, if you look at the variation among countries in the world for compliance with exercise and team sports, you can see, so this is just to illustrate the disparity. The Netherlands rates as the highest amount of exercise, physical exercise, nearly 13 hours per week is reported, whereas France, Chile, Italy, Japan, and Brazil, people are on average exercising only a third of that. All right, so we should tap into whatever's occurring in the Netherlands to get people to be so physically active, may hold powerful lessons for those countries that are coming up well short. But at the same time, to recognize that even if you could get, everybody exercising more, there would be a limitation. That wouldn't mean that nobody's getting cancer or that people are surviving decades longer. And the thing to remember is that people are not laboratory animals like mice. I mean, mice, you can modulate their diet. You can put them on caloric restriction and see what happens, or ensure that they spend enough time on the exercise wheel. But humans aren't like that. We're autonomous agents. We have complicated lives. We have trade-offs between what we spend our time doing. And most humans don't design their lifestyle around the pursuit of optimal health. They're trying to do a variety of things. No doubt they care about their health, but they also care about their financial security, their job, their career, their friends, their family. And so in the next chapter, I will be situating wisdom, inquiry, longevity science within this broader concern for the good life. And I think that constrains how much we can place on lifestyle, the ideal of lifestyle, to be sufficient to realize the aspirations of longevity science, of health, the aspirations of healthy longevity. Now, the final objection that I'll note, if you remember from past chapters, Herman Biggs, the mentor of Charles Winslow, coined the phrase that public health is purchasable. And he believed that disease was mostly preventable. And you could make a chronic disease expression of that big sentiment and say that cancer-free life is achievable if we only changed unhealthy behaviors. And you often do hear medical practitioners articulate this, right? Your doctor might simply say, if you stop smoking, you won't get lung cancer. And as I've already indicated, that there's some validity in what's being said there. It's like you would lower your risk of certain types of lung cancers, but it's not a silver bullet that will protect against not only lung cancer, all the other types of cancer. This sentiment is folk biology. I see it as advocacy, so I'm not against advocating for preventative health measures, but it's also an exaggeration of what's going to happen, right? Cancer, there's a variety of different cancers. Some are influenced by the lifestyle choices we choose, but as you get older, you will be more susceptible to a variety of different types of cancers. And so the actual scientific understanding of why cancer develops is really complex, and it's not down to just pointing to some specific lifestyle choices that people have made. And unfortunately, that is part of the legacy of the war against disease, is that we've told, in a sense, shamed people and guilted them to say, like, you brought this on yourself, that you wouldn't have gotten cancer had you, not consumed any alcohol and not ever smoked. So in the next chapter, I will cover the good life as a constraint on longevity science. The ideals of wisdom, inquiry, longevity science must be constrained by concerns for living a good life. And the latter does not involve, at least for many people, structuring their daily lives for optimal health and survival. Thus, it is critical that wisdom, inquiry, science explore all feasible options for increasing health span, including drug innovation that modulates the mechanisms of aging to improve our biological resilience to disease, frailty, disability throughout the adult lifespan. So this is the conclusion to Chapter 8 on the war on cancer. And in Chapter 9, I will unpack in a few more videos the concern for a good life.